Today, we're going to get into one of the most unbelievable stories from World War II. It's about America's deadliest submarine, the USS Tang, and the absolutely tragic, almost unbelievable way its final mission ended. So let's just start with a number, 33. That's the record for the most enemy ships sunk by a single American submarine during the war. It's a record that's never been broken, and it belongs to the USS Tang. These guys were, simply put, the absolute best at what they did. But that incredible success is what makes its fate so shocking. I mean, how does a submarine this good, this dominant, end up at the bottom of the ocean? And not because of the enemy, but because it was taken out by its very own weapon. All right, let's get into it.
To really get the weight of this tragedy, you first have to understand the legend of the Tang. This wasn't just some submarine, it was an absolute apex predator out there in the Pacific. The man in charge was Commander Richard O'Kane. His own crew called him the best skipper in the service, and his whole strategy was wild, incredibly risky. He would attack enemy convoys on the surface at night, right in the middle of their formations. This super aggressive style made him the most successful subcommander in the entire U.S. Navy.
I mean, look at this. The Tang was just in a completely different league. They were so unbelievably effective, racking up an amazing 33 confirmed kills. That number just blows everyone else out of the water. But the very weapon that made them so deadly also carried a hidden, fatal flaw.
And that brings us to the real heart of this story, the Mark 18 torpedo. It was a total game changer, for sure, but it also had this secret, a really deadly one.
You see, the Mark 18 was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was basically a ghost. It was electric, so it was silent and didn't leave a trail of bubbles. That made it almost impossible for the enemy to see coming. It was a true assassin's weapon. But here's the catch. A tiny defect in less than 1% of them that could cause the torpedo to circle right back on the sub that fired it. The crews had a grim nickname for them, boomerangs.
The official name for this was a circular run. A tiny, tiny flaw in the gyroscope, the torpedo's internal compass, could just send it into a hard turn and bring it right back home. It was a risk, yeah, but it was considered statistically acceptable.
So, fast forward to the night of October 24th, 1944. The Tang is in the thick of a Japanese convoy, having the single best night of its entire career. They're down to their last 2 torpedoes. Commander O'Kane decides to fire just one more.
The entire disaster, from start to finish, took just 20 seconds. The last torpedo is fired. 3 seconds later, it pops up to the surface and just yanks hard to the left. O'Kane is screaming for emergency speed, trying to get out of the way, but it's no use. The Tang's own weapon finishes its circle and slams right into its stern.
The blast was absolutely catastrophic. 3 compartments in the back flooded almost instantly. The stern dropped, and the Tang began its final plunge to the bottom of the Taiwan Strait, 180 feet down. But for the men who were still alive, trapped inside, the fight was just beginning.
Okay, so the men who survived the initial blast were trapped in the forward compartments. There was no rescue coming. Their only option was to go up, through 180 feet of pitch-black water, using a piece of gear that had never, ever been tested in a real combat escape.
The procedure they had to follow, it was a complete nightmare. They had to use something called the Momsen lung, which was a really primitive rebreather. They'd have to cram into this tiny chamber, flood it with seawater to equalize the crushing pressure from outside, and then push themselves out one by one into the dark. And the whole way up, you had to keep exhaling. If you held your breath, the expanding air would rupture your own lungs.
The odds were just awful. Of the 13 men who tried to escape from that forward torpedo room, only 5 actually made it to the surface alive. The other 8, they either died during the ascent or drowned once they got to the surface, just overcome by their injuries and exhaustion.
So, in the end, only 9 men survived. The 5 who escaped from below, plus Commander O'Kane and 3 others who'd been blown off the bridge by the explosion. 9 men out of a crew of 87.
But their ordeal was nowhere near over. As the sun came up, these 9 survivors floating in the middle of the ocean were about to come face to face with the consequences of their own incredible success.
They were picked up by a Japanese ship, and on that ship were sailors from the convoy the Tang had just torpedoed. The beating they took was immediate and brutal. For the next 10 months, they were shuttled between secret interrogation camps and brutal POW camps, enduring starvation and torture, and somehow surviving all the way until their liberation in August of 1945.
After the war, Commander O'Kane was rightfully awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation praised his conspicuous gallantry on that final patrol, celebrating his amazing success in destroying that Japanese convoy.
But here's the thing. The citation never mentions why the tank sank. The U.S. Navy classified the truth about the Mark 18 circular run. They hid the fact that America's greatest submarine was destroyed by its own flawed weapon.
And yet, despite its tragic and frankly ironic end, the USS Tang's record is still untouched. To this day, it is officially the #1 most successful American submarine of all time, both in ships sunk and in total tonnage. A true legend, born from incredible skill, aggression, and bravery.
The story of the USS Tang is an incredible tale of heroism and sacrifice, no doubt. But it also forces you to think about the hidden dangers of our own technology, right? The unforeseen price of being at the cutting edge. It just leaves you with this haunting question about what victory really costs, especially when our own weapons turn against us.